A Ukrainian spy chief has been gunned down in Kyiv, sparking claims of a Russian hit, just hours after Moscow launched two of the biggest missile and drone strikes of the 40-month-long war. Kyiv again. My name is Jerome Starkey. I'm the defence editor at The Sun newspaper, and this is Frontline, your weekly roundup of the most important news from the war in Ukraine. Colonel Ivan Voronich from the Ukraine's domestic SBU intelligence service was shot dead as he left a building in the capital, Kyiv, this morning, the day that we're filming this episode. There are unconfirmed reports that he was a commander in the SBU's Alpha Force, which is its most elite sort of special forces division. These are troops that I've met and spent time with on visits to Ukraine, and also unconfirmed reports this morning that he had been involved in operations, and specifically in sabotage operations. Those have been some of Ukraine's most stunning and successful operations, hundreds, indeed thousands of miles behind the front lines in Russian territory. The most dramatic of which, of course, was that recent drone strike against strategic Russian airfields, where the drones came out of lorries. Now, there is no confirmation yet that Colonel Voronich, who was 50 years old, was involved in those operations. And there are conflicting reports emerging on social media, as you would expect at this stage, amid a sort of blizzard of Russian misinformation. But some pro-Kremlin channels already claiming this as a successful Russian assassination. Others suggesting that perhaps, and trying to sow suggestions that this might have been inter-service rivalry or gangsterism or corruption within Ukraine. But that sort of misinformation fits the pattern that we would expect from Russia in the wake of an incident like this. Now, of course, Ukraine has carried out successful assassinations of high-value, prominent Russian figures inside Russia. It would be almost inevitable that Russia would try and do something like this in return. So if that emerges, if that is the case, that would not be a surprise. One former SBU official describing Colonel Voronich's death as a great loss to the SBU. Officially, the SBU spokesman merely confirming that one of its officers has been killed, that investigators have opened an investigation and they are keeping an open mind at this stage to who the perpetrators are and to try and bring them to justice. It comes in a week where there have been some notable deaths of significant individuals, perhaps none more so than Russia's former transport minister, Roman Starovoy. Now, Minister Starovoy was found dead in a car in the outskirts of Moscow on Monday with a weapon in the vehicle. The suggestion was it was suicide. He had been sacked by decree by President Putin just hours before, earlier that day. So he gets sacked by Putin, and in the afternoon, he's found dead. Russian media suggesting it is a suicide, but of course speculation that it could have been murder, because so many prominent Russians who appear to fall foul of the Kremlin tend to fall out of buildings. Starovoy had been sacked just hours after a weekend of total travel chaos in Russia. Hundreds of flights had been cancelled because of successful long-range drone strikes by Ukraine, and these strikes often target Russian airfields to try and deplete Russia's ability to strike Ukraine from those airfields, but that has a knock-on effect on civilian airports, because if the skies are crowded with drones and threats, then civilian aircraft, it's not safe for them to fly. So a weekend of chaos. Starovoy sacked by Putin. In the afternoon, he's found dead. And a few days before that, worth noting as well, that a vice president of Russia's Transneft, which is the state-owned oil and gas pipeline company, Andrei Budilov, was found dead after having allegedly fallen out of his apartment building window in Moscow. That absolutely fitting the pattern of sort of Russian, what we believe to be Russian state assassinations of those who fall foul of President Putin. All this going on while on the battlefield, Ukraine appears to be building a new line of intense defences, some 20 kilometres behind the front line. Now, this echoes what Russia did, particularly in south-central Zaporizhia province, occupied Zaporizhia, in 2023, building these really, really well-prepared defensive lines which make it so hard for either side to take ground, because fundamentally there's so much surveillance, drone surveillance in the skies, that if you can slow down the rate of advance whenever troops have to break cover and try to move forward, then they become very, very vulnerable to being spotted by drones, and then subsequently either to drone strikes or artillery strikes. And clearly, if Ukraine is likely to be doing this just to slow down or limit any possibility of further significant Russian advances, to continue exacting that heavy toll on Russia as they try and advance, as they continue to advance, but to allow Ukraine to exact that very, very heavy price, to make it fundamentally unsustainable for Russia in the long term, and that will simultaneously strengthen Ukraine's hands in negotiations. The Institute for the Study of War reports encouragingly that Ukraine appears to have taken some ground in Sumy in counterattacks. Remember, that's where Ukraine had invaded Kursk. Russia has retaken that territory in Kursk, has now crossed into Sumy. The speculation that Russia is planning a major assault on Sumy province, possibly even an attempt to take the regional capital. For the time being, Ukraine has reversed that momentum in a small area of the Sumy front line. We can't do this episode, of course, without talking about where Donald Trump is. Recordings have emerged of Trump saying he would bomb the out of Russia and indeed of China.
Putin has said, if you go in to Ukraine, we're going to bomb out of Moscow. I'm telling you, I have no choice, the public wants it.
Typically bombastic language from Trump. These were recorded on the campaign trail. He has, however, this week appeared to have a change of heart again. Weapons supplies have been turned back onto Ukraine, and he's talked publicly about sending more Patriot missiles and how Ukraine desperately needs those. That's become abundantly obvious with the strikes this week. We saw 741 missiles and drones fired by Russia on the night of the 8th to the 9th of June, and then the subsequent night from the 9th to the 10th, 415 missiles and drones. Now, we've talked about that increase. What's really alarming is a report in the New York Times suggesting that this level of violence, this level of bombardment each night could become normal, because Russian industry will be able to supply up to 1,000 of these drones for nightly attacks by the autumn of this year. Very quickly, other things to note. America's Secretary of State Marco Rubio is meeting Russia's Foreign Secretary Sergei Lavrov. Russian state media has also responded to Trump's apparent change of heart with a lot of articles this week analysing Trump's thinking, but notably really critical of President Trump. One paper calling his policy to try and make peace a dismal failure, another saying, that same article saying that he looks like a loser, that the carrot approach hasn't worked and now he's turning to the stick. They reporting that stick is the threat of mega sanctions, imposing some 500% tariffs, trade tariffs, on any country that does business with Russia. I'd say unclear at this stage why those papers, which almost certainly acting on orders from the Kremlin, have had such a stark change in tone, but evidence that this relationship between the White House and Kyiv, and indeed between the White House and Moscow and the Kremlin, is turbulent and unpredictable. As ever, thank you very much for your questions. If you do have any questions, please ask them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer as many as I can next time. I'm going to rattle through a few this time. First question, why doesn't the EU deliver more of its aid? Actually, just had a quick look at the Kiel Institute, a German think tank which tracks this. The European Union, of it, the 58.5 billion euros which it's pledged, has delivered about 50 billion of that. That is significantly higher percentage, for example, than the United States. 47 billion promised, 29 billion dispersed, according to that tracker. Clearly, Ukraine always wants more of the money that's promised sooner. That is natural and ongoing. Question number 2. With all of the losses that Russia has suffered over the course of this conflict, and with so much military personnel and materiel committed to what is Russia's western frontier, are other parts of Russia vulnerable? The short answer, absolutely yes. Russia has had to move significant numbers of forces, particularly from the sort of central and far east of Russian territory, to fight in Ukraine. Inevitably, it is more exposed in those territories where those soldiers have come from. The question is, are any other countries going to exploit that vulnerability? And Russia has clearly made great efforts to court Beijing and indeed to court Pyongyang, its other neighbour in the Far East. And there's no indication that either of those countries would really have any interest in triggering an armed conflict with Russia now. And the final question for today, a reference last week's episode: why would the head of a navy, or rather the deputy head of a navy, plan an invasion? Forgive me if I didn't make that clear, but the Major General we were talking about, who was killed by Ukraine, was the deputy head of Russia's navy, but his background was as a Marine infantry officer. So he was from Ukraine's 155th Naval Infantry. They are Russia's equivalent of the US Marines or the British Royal Marines. They are an infantry force, and they would be well suited. Indeed, they're some of Russia's most elite and well-trained soldiers, and they are involved in the fighting in Sumy. So that's why he was involved. Thank you very much for watching. Again, if you've got any questions, please do ask them in the comments below, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can next time. We're in a Ukrainian armoured vehicle, and we're heading towards the Russian border.